Hi everyone. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm Joe Firestone, your host, and our topic for tonight is the big money in the 2022 midterms. And hello, Steve. How are you? Steve says, "Wow, the year is almost over." Well, Steve, we haven't even had Thanksgiving yet, which reminds me, I have to order some lamb shanks for dinner on Thanksgiving. Hello, Kay. How are you? Glad to see you both. Okay, I'm going to start this with a piece from Truth Out. Actually, what I'm going to do is start this by sharing the post. One thing that's been dogging democracy is the big money in politics. It's been dogging democracy for ages. Anyway, there's a piece that appeared a few days ago in Truth Out that talks about the kinds of money that are being spent by the rich, the party committees, the corporations, the PACs, and the super PACs, which people who raise money through small dollar donations have to cope with while they're running for office. This piece was written by Sasha Abramsky at Truth Out, and it was published on November 11th, so it's been a few days. Despite GOP orchestrated voter suppression and the disenfranchisement of many voters, tens of millions of people exercised their right to vote on November 8th, and the 2022 midterms did not usher in the more widespread and acute breakdown of the democratic process that many had feared would occur. That many had feared actually could occur. There were no reports of major violence at the polls, for example, and majority of voters in most states repudiated the election deniers who sought control over state election apparatuses solely to ensure that they could produce GOP electoral college victories, even if the electorate had rejected such outcomes at the polls. Yet, even as many of us breathe a sigh of relief that the basic mechanisms of the voting process are still functioning, we must not lose sight of the ongoing crisis at the heart of U.S. democracy. The unprecedented and largely secretive role that the super rich now play in managing U.S. electoral outcomes. I will highlight that in yellow. A huge amount of dark money now funds both super PACs and also more generally political interest groups. Earlier this year, the New York Times and ProPublica reported that 90-year-old Bar Said, a secretive Chicago manufacturing tycoon, had donated $1.6 billion to the Marble Freedom Trust to push its agenda of securing conservative judicial appointments up and down the ranks of state and federal judiciary. This is a long-term investment. This is a long-term investment that over the coming years and decades will buttress conservatives as they groom the next generation of right-wing legal scholars and work to ensure the election of politicians who will nominate ever more right-wing figures to judicial benches. That money, the largest one-off political donation in U.S. history, instantly made Sayed hardly a household figure in U.S. public life, one of the country's most important arbiters determining the face of the legal system, and by extension, the country's regulatory edifice, its environmental policies, access to abortion, voting rights, the fate of gun control laws, civil rights, and so much more over the coming decades. And it catapulted him into the top tier of politically active billionaires, joining the club that includes Charles Koch on the right and George Soros on the left, and a handful of others. But modern U.S. billionaires don't confine themselves to setting up or funding think tanks and other organizations intended to shape the public debate on key issues. It has now been 12 years since the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling opened up the floodgates to corporate donations and super PAC monies coming into elections. And as a result, each election cycle since then has seen the growing consequences of this decision as the super wealthy use their money to prop up pet candidates and determine the crucial citizens' initiatives. In 2022, billionaire plutocrats, the U.S. equivalent of the Russian oligarchy, poured vast amounts of money into political races. A report from Americans for Tax Fairness, ATF, recently released calculated that through the end of September, 445 billionaires had collectively donated close to $900 million to political candidates this election season. I guess I have to comment at this point and point out that these billionaires are really pikers. I mean, that's roughly only $2 million per billionaire. Anyway, among those, a mere handful, according to the report, made up the bulk of these contributions. Between them, donating more than $600 million. By the time the election was held on November 8th, ATF estimated the total donations made by U.S. billionaires would top $1 billion. Indeed, in late October, the Washington Post calculated that the top 50 political donors had injected $1.1 billion into political races this expensive election season. "59% of these donations went to Republican Party candidates, although liberal billionaires George Soros and Michael Bloomberg, who I wouldn't exactly call any kind of liberal, except maybe neoliberal, also pumped huge sums into the elections with the intent of shoring up Democratic congressional representation and pushing back against some of the anti democracy forces coursing through the body politic these days." And Sam Bankman Fried, the young cryptocurrency guru, also donated tens of millions of dollars to pro democratic PACs, presumably before his business empire suddenly crumbled in the first part of November. In 2022, largely out of the public eye, billionaire PayPal founder Peter Thiel bankrolled candidates like Arizona Senate hopeful Blake Masters and J.D. Vance, the newly elected senator from Ohio, to the tune of tens of millions, of dollars. Now, we have to ask ourselves whether Blake Masters would have won the primary, in Arizona, would have gotten through the primary in Arizona without that money from Peter Thiel. And J.D. Vance certainly wouldn't have won either the Ohio primary for senator, and certainly would not have won the election for senator from Ohio without those tens of $1,000,000 he got from Peter Thiel. Or Peter Thiel, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name. As far as Sam Bankman Fried was concerned, most probably Nina Turner would be in the House now, except for Sam Bankman Fried. And of course, the money from AIPAC that was given to Shontel Brown. I'm giving just a few examples of the influence of this really big money in politics. Two Democratic candidates who were likely to win their primaries in North Carolina were snuffed out by big money. A candidate named Attica Scott in Kentucky also was snuffed out by big money. Jessica Cisneros has been beaten twice now by big money in South Texas. And Henry Cuellar is still the congressman there because of the influence of big money. In race after race after race, though the big money candidates don't always win, they win enough of the time that we can safely say that most of the Congress is now populated by people who are beholden to big money. Now, the victories that do sometimes occur for people who raise only small dollar money, only small dollar donations, those victories are relatively few because it is so routine for more and more both Republican and Democratic candidates to take the big money when they run for election. Building supply magnate Diane Hendricks spent $16 million propping up Ron Johnson's campaign for re-election as senator from Wisconsin. He has gotten elected and re-elected now twice. Because he has been the recipient of the big money. He is relatively unpopular, but he can flood the airways and drown out the message of his opposition. The article by Sasha says the intervention was probably critical to sustaining the unpopular Johnson, arguably Donald Trump's most vocal apologist in the Senate in the last weeks of the campaign, as his Democratic opponent, Mandela Barnes, surged to within a point of victory in the election. Hendricks' donations came on top of more than $20 million that she and fellow billionaires Dick and Liz Bayouline donated to Johnson's campaign in 2016. What did these billionaires get from their investment? A pliant senator willing to use his public office to push for amendments to tax legislation that would save his billionaire patrons hundreds of millions of dollars in reduced taxes. They get great returns on their investment. In New York, Ronald Belauder of the Estee Lauder Company spent $11 million boosting GOP gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin in his race against Democratic incumbent Kathy Hochul. The money didn't ultimately swing the election to Zeldin, but it did contribute to significantly narrowing the gap between the two candidates, and likely was influential in bringing out enough GOP voters to flip a critical number of the state's congressional seats from blue to red, results that might produce the margin of victory nationally for the GOP to regain control of the House, of Representatives. Right now, it looks like the Republicans, as of tonight, are going to end up with 219 to 221 seats. That would mean that those contributions to Lee Zeldin were themselves responsible for the margin of victory nationally for the GOP to regain control of the House, of Representatives. In Los Angeles, we had Rick Caruso, a billionaire mall developer, spending $100 million on his own money. He eclipsed the advertising spent by Karen Bass in her race by a factor of 13 to 1. The money turned him into a viable candidate for taking the reins in City Hall. The article says, as of its writing, with slightly less than half the votes counted, Caruso has a 2% lead over Bass. Now, Bass has now caught him and surpassed him and is winning by a 4-point lead. I don't know offhand whether the race has been projected yet. It looks like Karen Bass is going to win, and that money is going out the window. But the point being that Caruso would have been nowhere without that $100 million in spending. Someone like him, without a political background of any kind, would not have been running. Who did he freeze out? Who else might have been nominated by the Republicans if he hadn't had the $100 million to spend? Or if he legally could not have spent the $100 million? That I don't know. But I do know his money had a tremendous impact on the race, even though he did not win. The money injected into the political process by the super wealthy is just the tip of corporate influence iceberg created by the Citizens United decision. All told, between super wealthy donors, corporations, and small donations, nearly $17 billion was spent on the 2022 midterm elections, according to an analysis by Open Secrets. In the 5 most contested Senate races alone, $1.3 billion was burned through. No other country on earth spends anywhere near as much during its election season. The disproportionate influence played by a handful of billionaires and by opaque outside spending groups, those are the super PACs, on the country's political system isn't healthy for democracy. Now, that is the understatement of the year, of course. By definition, it undermines democracy. Yes, the country dodged the bullet on Tuesday by rejecting election deniers who sought to capture critical state offices in order to undermine the integrity of election systems. But we're a long way from repairing a political system that remains disconcertingly on the hook to corporate donors and to unaccountable billionaires. We must stop the rich and the billionaires from controlling our elections. Without the big money, some of us could run for political office. How many people are frozen out by the need to have big money to run for Congress, and to run for Senate? How many extremely competent people would contemplate actually running for office? if they didn't have to raise super amounts from super wealthy donors. Yes, they play a disproportionate influence. They select people they prefer to support for the primaries. And some of those people win. If the money wasn't a factor, those people, the people who win and the people who run because they receive the money, would not become congressmen and senators and would not even have a chance to become congressmen and senators. The disproportionate influence played is not just the positive influence of getting some people elected. Even more important is the effect the money has in freezing out people who otherwise would probably have taken on the burden of running because they wanted to serve our democracy. Our democracy, of course, is gone. It is now a plutocracy, or more appropriately, a kakistocracy, which is ruled by the worst. Because a lot of the people brought in by the billionaires, supported by the billionaires, are the worst. This is government. We have government by the millionaires because they're supported by the millionaires and by that funding structure. I've said many times that we can't get them out of politics through passing laws because they have bought the people who pass the laws. Oh, by the way, Trump just announced his candidacy for president.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what we have to deal with now. He will grab headlines. He has a particular hold on the press because they think that he's clickbait. He wouldn't have had a chance to get elected the first time around if he were not a billionaire himself. We wouldn't have had to contend with him at all. We wouldn't have the threat to democracy today if we did not have the billionaires having an influence in our system. Now, many of you know that I'm for getting rid of the billionaires entirely. That is to say, for making it illegal for there to be billionaires. But that's neither here nor there. The issue is, how can we get the big money out of politics? I've contended now, well, for a year. I started to stream about the people getting rid of money, of the big money in politics, by creating a movement where we turn the money given to campaigns or supporting campaigns by big money interests, where we turn that money against the candidates who receive it or who are supported by it. I've been saying for over a year now, we cannot do this through legislative means. It won't get done by the courts somehow outlawing the big money. Instead, they have made it legal for the big money to come in. The courts are the problem. What we must do is create a movement ourselves to persuade people that they must adopt a rule before they vote, and that rule must be: do not vote for any candidate either taking the big money or being supported by the big money. We ourselves, one by one and collectively, must adopt such a rule so that we never vote for anyone who is taking the big money or supported by it. Even though I've been talking about it for a year now, at least once a week, and sometimes more often, the movement hasn't started yet. It seems like people are more interested in paying attention to the individual characteristics of those running who have been bought by the big money, and thinking somehow they're making a meaningful choice when they choose between two candidates who are taking the big money. People, voters, continually engage in the illusion of choosing between two people who are working for the Uniparty. Now, I'm not going to say these decisions are not meaningful at all. You can see from the attention that I've paid to the past election, I do think there are differences between the two parties. I do think there are differences between and among candidates, that some are better than others. So I do think that it's right for people to go vote and make rational choices. But while they're doing it, they have to realize that there will be no fundamental changes to the system until the money is pushed out. And that the money can't be pushed out by legislation. It can't be pushed out of the system. Can't be pushed out of the system by union movements. It can't be pushed out of the system. Can't be pushed out of the system by people engaging in mutual aid. Such movements are very, very important. I'm not speaking against them. I'm just saying that they won't get the money out of politics. Some of the candidates who were recently successful and who we really like, candidates like Summer Lee and Chris Deluzio and Greg Casar and Maxwell Frost, and candidates that we have previously voted for was certainly better than the candidates they replaced and by other people who are in office at this very time. But there are not enough of candidates who have won because they used small dollar donations to fundamentally change the system. In the last election, we may have doubled the size of the squad. It is certainly possible we may have doubled it. We've had AOC, Rashida, Ayanna, Ilhan, Jamal Bowman, and Cori Bush. And now we have Summer Lee and Greg Casar, okay, Delia Ramirez, Becca Balint, Chris Deluzio, and perhaps others, virtually doubling the size of the squad. But that is not enough. That is not enough. If we double the squad every 2 years, we have congressional elections. We would not have enough in the short period of time we have to turn back the climate crisis. We would not have enough of these small donor people to free Congress of the influence of the big money. It would be too long to get enough people in Congress to meet the climate emergency we must meet in the next few years. We need a process that is faster to get the toxic money out of politics. We can be faster through a movement that we form that is devoted to getting people to accept that they need to use the litmus test. If that is the only way, everybody needs to use the litmus test of voting against people, not worrying so much about voting for people, but voting against the candidates who are supported by the big money or who have taken the big money for their campaigns. The idea of voting against will make change faster than the idea of voting for. We could have enough people in 2 election cycles to pack the Supreme Court and to impeach the justices who have been making such bad law. Justices are not supposed to make law anyway, but they have been making very, very, very bad law, taking away our democratic rights. And we sit here and we can't do something as simple as agreeing on using a litmus test to clean out the system. That is how bad things are. That is how bad things are. We have to somehow come together to start this movement. Now, I am not what you'd call a political organizer. I'm a live streamer. I can develop an idea. I can present an idea. But I am not an activist. I used to be an activist at one time, but I'm a little old for activism now. I need some activists to create this movement. And we collectively need this movement because it is the only way to get the money out of politics. And we cannot pass the laws we need and get the people into the courts to get the money out of politics without ourselves doing it first. Our action, our activism must come first. And it has to be effective in removing the money for long enough that we can pass these laws, these constitutional amendments, and do these other things that we need to do to get this money out of politics. So, who will step forward and start this movement? Who will come together and start this movement? That is the question I am asking tonight. So Steve Wolfbrand said, if it's your own money, are you taking big money? Your campaign is being supported by big money, even if it's your own money. If you're running like Caruso was running, his campaign was taking big money. It was legal for him to give his money to that campaign. He didn't have the right to spend that money on politics, even if it was his own. Why didn't he have the right? Because such action is dangerous for democracy. People can't have rights that are dangerous for democracy. Their rights have to be consistent with democracy. Their rights have to empower democracy in some way. Democracy is not a suicide pact. We can't give rights to people to do things that will undermine a democracy. But we have allowed people to take their own money and spend virtually unlimited quantities of it in their own campaign. Somehow we thought that the danger to democracy this represents is outweighed by the individual rights of the rich person who wants to spend their money that way. No, we can't allow that, Steve. We've got to get rid of it. But first, the way to get rid of it is with the negative power of the people to say no to candidates whose campaigns are using that big money. Forget about the people themselves. Focus on the campaign. Is the campaign taking big money? Is the campaign being supported by big money? If so, you must vote no. If so, you must vote no. And that is my message for tonight. Steve says, ha ha ha. I'm old too, Joe. You're not as old as I am, Steve. You're just a baby. Kay Ryan says Whitmer is on MSNBC now. She did really good in Michigan. She did. But she takes big money too. She's not the kind of candidate we need. And she's been pretty good as a governor of Michigan. But let me tell you, Kay, Abdul Saeed would have made a better governor than she. Abdul Saeed did not get to be governor of Michigan because of the influence of big money, at least partly because of the influence of big money. CC Swift says, hello, Joe, 9:45 break. Some hood activists to get money out of politics might be Howie H., John Stasevich, and of course, the Mod Squad. CC Swift, what I have to say to you is it's not they who get money out of politics. It's we who can build a movement that says no to campaigns that use the big money in politics. Again, focus on the campaign. Focus on the money. Is it there? If it's there, vote against that campaign and its candidate. Gerstadt says, in the U.S., money equals speech equals violence. That may be, but we can use speech to start a movement to make big money ineffective in politics, to make it toxic to the candidates who use it. Sandy says, Stephanie Kelton would be an awesome candidate to get behind. Now, Sandy, you know, I greatly appreciate Stephanie's work, and I like her very well as a person. She was the one who recruited me to blog at the UMKC site for 3.5 years. I consider Stephanie a friend. I don't consider her a close friend, but I consider her a friend. But I don't know if she would be an awesome candidate to get behind. Okay, I just don't know. Okay, I think we need to get behind. It's not about getting behind a candidate so much. What we need to get behind is the movement to get the toxic money out of politics. If we get it out of politics, then good candidates will emerge for the Congress, for the presidency, and for the judiciary as well, because the Congress, the Senate, will insist themselves on candidates that are free from big money support. And by the way, remember, in the judicial campaigns, there are now judicial campaigns where big money is spent to get particular judges in office. That goes on now all the time. Democracy cannot tolerate that. What can be done about it? A Senate full of people who have not taken any big money donations can mobilize in the same way we have mobilized to get them into office, to stop any candidates who are being supported by big money. The right kinds of candidates will emerge, but we need this campaign. And I need ideas about how to start it. Speaking of Stephanie Kelton, she might be a good one to start a campaign like this, but she's too busy campaigning for the MMT. Don't get me wrong, MMT education is wonderful and it's essential. It's something we have to have for our democracy. But even more, we have to have this litmus test movement to throw the big money out of politics. CC is saying something I haven't understood, perhaps. It says, I meant as activist organizers to start the movement, which is TGMOOP. Does that stand for Thank God Money Out of Politics? Hashtag Thank God Money Out of Politics. K. Ryan says, we all are in agreement, Joe. We may all be in agreement with each other, and that's great, Kay. But somehow we have to get together the ideas we need to begin this movement. So far, it's not going anywhere. CC Swift says, I meant as activist organizers to start the movement because they have some ears and connections. Okay, are you talking about Howie Hawkins? And John Stasevich? Maybe I should talk to Stasevich. I haven't thought of that because it seems to me that Howie Hawkins and John Stasevich are both people who themselves are running for office. They're not organizing. They're not trying to organize a campaign to get money out of politics, to get people together to get money out of politics. And that's the problem. Now, I've talked to a number of people about this idea and asked them to join me in putting it forward. But they all seem to have more important things to do. Because they haven't really taken me up on it. Oh, CC Swift says no. To get money out of politics, GMOOP, to get money out of politics. CC Swift says yes. Hawkins, but David Strider. Hey, CC, how do you know David Strider? I'm not sure David Strider is the organizer we need to get this started. I don't know if I've met the organizer we need to get this started. Okay, anyway, I think we are nearing the end for tonight. If you have any last comments, I'll be glad to take them under consideration, to reply to them. Also, I want to remind you at this time, I have my Buy Me a Coffee account, www.buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. And I also have my Patreon account, which is, of course, at where is my damn Patreon account now? At patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. David Strider on YouTube. Yeah, I know Dave Strider. I've interviewed him a few times on here. But in previous years, Steve Wolfbrand says good night, everyone. CC Swift says David Strider, okay, on YT. I need to talk to somebody who knows how to start a movement and who might be willing to drop everything and start up this movement. And I haven't met that person yet. Kay says, night all, see you all tomorrow. Yes, there'll be 3 streams again tomorrow. Tomorrow is Wednesday, so there will be 3 streams again on Wednesday. And so I'll see you then, when I'll have more for you. Thanks very much for coming. I'm out until then.